Look at the camera.
Okay, welcome everyone to session 1 of the Educator Collaborative. We are in workshop 1, culturally and linguistically sustaining book clubs for the upper grades and middle school classrooms. We are joined by 2 great educators. We have Carla España, who previously taught ELA in 6th grade in New York City, and she's currently faculty at Hunter College. And we are also joined by Luz Herrera, who is faculty at California State University, Fresno, and she previously taught K-6 in New York City as well. Welcome, and take it away.
Thank you so much. We are so excited to be joining this beautiful community. We've had such a wonderful experience with our previous Ed Collab gathering, so we're really excited to join you. So I'm Carla España, and as we were introduced, we've both been educators in New York City, and I taught 6th grade transitional bilingual, dual language bilingual, and I really always return to my memories from those experiences with the students, and I'm really excited that that has been really the root to my interest in this field of bilingual education. And now I'm really excited that I get to engage with pre-service and in-service teachers at Hunter College in my role as the bilingual education clinical doctoral lecturer. And of course, what I love about these kinds of gatherings is that it reminds us that we can create our communities, right? And sometimes if communities or support or growth doesn't exist in your traditional spaces, you create your own, right? And so I'm really thankful that my friend, my colleague, my fellow scholar, Luz Herrera, and I are presenting today. Especially since it's been a year since Luz and I defended our dissertations. So we are in celebration mode. Hopefully at some point this weekend, you know, we'll pause and reflect and celebrate. So it's really a nice time to spend with you.
Thank you, Carla. And yes, again, my name is Luz Herrera, and today we're going to be talking about culturally and linguistically sustaining book clubs. And this comes from Django Paris and Sami Alim's work on culturally sustaining pedagogies, and I have the book right here.
Love that book. Everyone needs to get it. Every school needs to have a teacher book club with this book, please.
Yes, I'm actually coming to you from Sacramento. I'm presenting later on at a conference here at Sac State, and Sami Alim is going to be one of the speakers, so I look forward to speaking to him more about this and telling him about our presentation today. Yes, thanks, Carla.
So we also want to remind you of our hashtag for today. So if you've already been taking part of the Ed Collab gathering, know the hashtag is the Ed Collab gathering. And then as you go through the different workshops throughout the day, you'll add the hashtag of the number of the workshop. So please, if you're interacting with us today, we welcome your questions, your comments, especially we're going to be posing questions throughout, and we'd love for you to engage with us, especially considering our topic is book clubs, right, and conversations and culturally linguistically sustaining ones. So we would love to see you on the Twitterverse. And so it's hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering, #1. And our handles are at Profesora España, which, you know, well, we could talk about accents another day. That's and at Profesora_Luz Yadira for Luz Herrera's handle as well.
Thank you.
So let's get started. So for our agenda or our workshop overview for today, what we will be discussing is one, just go through a few texts that we recommend. And obviously in the time that we have, we don't have enough time to cover all the texts that we use and all the texts that we would recommend. So please definitely follow us on Twitter to get more of our recommendations. It's just whatever we could put in to discuss under 40 minutes with our other topics. We'll also discuss translanguaging, what it is, what does it look like, especially since this is our field of research and what we found with translanguaging practices in our own research studies. We will share with you some tools that will be helpful for your culturally and linguistically sustaining book clubs, and teacher practice. What does that look like when we also engage in our book clubs together? And of course, as always, every time I meet with teachers, whether it's in person or via these kinds of platforms, we have to practice it ourselves. So we will have an activity to engage in together. And so let's begin. All right, so the first thing we want to share with you, obviously, are some texts and ways that you can organize your texts. So one of the ways you can organize your texts are around themes. And this is a text set that I organized from some schools that are doing book clubs around themes of growing up and the issues that come across for middle school students as they grow up. And Aristotle and Dante has been a favorite amongst teachers and students, and the story of this beautiful friendship. And it's available in Spanish and English for our bilingual students that are in bilingual and monolingual classrooms that also speak Spanish. And so they've loved also listening to the audio version of the one in English that's done by Lin-Manuel Miranda. So that's been a really popular text. And pairing Piecing Me Together with One Last Word, since I'm actually using those two texts this summer, I'm really, really excited because I'm planning a curriculum for summer for about 4 weeks with 7th and 8th graders. So I'm using Piecing Me Together and One Last Word to talk about the role of poetry in our lives, and also to really join the character on this journey in Piecing Me Together. And Under the Mesquite and The Poet X, I've loved reading The Poet X. I've actually been reading it these days because I was discussing with teachers yesterday. So I'm really, really excited that I got my copy. And really, I've been thinking about these books that have been such an impact on my life with these themes through poetry. And now that The Poet X came out, Elizabeth Acevedo has just blessed my life, and I have been pairing that with Guadalupe McCall's book. And Meg Medina, with her brilliance in Jackie Delgado Quiere Darte Una Paliza, or Jackie Delgado Quiere, the Spanish and English titles, also Wants to Kick Your Ass. Really, one of my highlights was at NCTE last year, hearing from students, right, at these roundtables that were in attendance to talk about the themes that they saw with this text. And so then for me to see my teachers reading this and engage with this to plan for their students has been really powerful. So one way it could be around themes. Let's go to see another one. So another way you can gather your texts are around author studies. And there's so many, amazing authors who are publishing these texts that are helping our students tackle social issues in ways that will help them process what's happening, really having a historical context to them. And for me, Duncan Tonatiuh does that really, really well. Separate is Never Equal has been a staple in many of the book clubs with my 5th grade classrooms that I visit. And so I really recommend you take a look at the other texts. And for students who really are having this beautiful experience of engaging topics like segregation, immigration, family separation, what that might look like if you had them do that across different books by the same author. So that's another recommendation that I have. Following another kind is poetry. So we are in National Poetry Month, and I'm just on a cloud because, as I tweeted, I don't know, last night or this morning, it's been a blur the last 24 hours because I've just been processing this beautiful day I had with teachers on poetry yesterday at a school in Harlem, and it was middle school teachers. And we were really discussing the ways that starting this poetry unit has allowed them to get to know their students better, and their students feel the sense of freedom to really process in ways that they haven't been able to process before. And so I'm really, really excited. So these are just some of the texts that the teachers have been using in that school and that I recommended yesterday as well. So maybe looking at poetry besides the Poetry Foundation and poets.org websites where they are gathering poems, singular poems, I've been recommending books. Bravo is a book that one of my in-service teachers, she's a second-year teacher who you'll hear from a little bit later. She had it in her classroom with her 2nd grade students. And then I visited other classrooms in the school and other schools, and they've been using that book in the upper grades as well to talk about historical figures. And students maybe approaching poetry through saying, like, I want to learn about people right? And I want to read and discuss, and maybe having book clubs around poetry. Who does it? Carol Boston and Weatherford's books, right? Where she has her, the one on Schomburg, illustrated by Eric Velasquez, and so many others she has that will help you merge that like historical biography approach to poetry, and students who want to tackle it that way in book clubs, that would be another option. So within poetry, we have Kwame Alexander's, and you could do that as an author study text set for book clubs. You could do that, have them engage in it through also the themes of growing up, and that's the Rebound being the latest, really excited for that. And obviously like Jacqueline Woodson's award-winning memoir that has really impacted so many classrooms that I visited, even an 8th grade teacher who so beautifully introduced Brown Girl Dreaming to her classroom, 8th grade classroom. This was Young Women's Leadership School a few years ago when I visited. And then all the girls at the end of the poetry unit wrote their own Brown Girl Dreaming anthology. So following the examples that Jacqueline Woodson set for us, with the first poem being about the day she was born, and then poems around issues of family, schooling, right? That poem Gifted, on how her sisters, right, education and schooling experience and relation to reading and writing was different than Jacqueline Woodson's. So for me, it's been what a beautiful way to take on poetry and have students engage with these texts, right, inside out and back again, and thinking about how we can also take texts that help us understand things that have happened in history to help us further make the connections to movements and things that are happening now, and what people are critiquing and things that are happening in our society now. So poetry, thinking about different ways to organize our texts. And finally, because we can talk about this for a whole semester, which I do, and I'm thankful for my students at Hunter who are very patient and appreciative with me, that I introduced every class with a read aloud, or I talk text in every one of my courses. So I have, like 4 months to do this with students, and now condensing it into a few minutes for you. But what about pairing texts, right? So what about thinking different kinds of texts, whether it's poetry, memoirs, fiction, nonfiction, different genres that you can pair around similar topics. So I'm thinking about No Crystal Stair, which that text for me was introduced to me by Cornelius Minor when we were doing work in Georgia. And I was in Perry, Georgia, and we were doing book clubs. We were launching book clubs there with teachers one summer. And he recommended this book. And it was amazing to hear the teachers engage with this text. And then we have the book itch, right, as a picture book that we can pair it to really learn more about Louis Michaud's life and his role as this with his bookstore here, actually in Harlem, which I'm actually a few blocks away because I'm in Harlem right now. And what about thinking about his things that have happened in history, and the trauma and the oppression that minoritized populations have experienced in this country, and resistance movements, and how to those experiences with Tintingle's book, right? With Inside Out and Back Again. So I feel like we can pair texts to have students feel this freedom to discuss them. Separate is Never Equal with Sylvia and Aki. So you have the picture book version, right, with Sylvia Mendes's family's experience, and then you have the chapter book, Sylvia and Aki, that tells you each other chapter of different perspective. The Revolution of Evelyn Serrano. Oh my goodness, this book, Sonia Manzano really had me feeling my Harlem love, and thinking about the Young Lords Party, and thinking about really everything that I wish I would have been able to teach my students when I was a 6th grade teacher. So this book really places us in this particular time period in New York, with this character who's growing up during this time and becoming a part of this movement. And what about pairing with La Borinqueña, right? And thinking about Puerto Rican communities in different ways, especially with what's happening right now in Puerto Rico, with the historical legacy of colonization and present manifestations of it. And I think our middle school students, we need, as educators, to provide them with the text that'll help them grapple and understand this. March, thank you, John Lewis, Andrew Aiden, Nate Powell for this amazing series that I have been come off of shelves and in libraries that I've been visiting in schools. And so pairing March with Carol Boston Weatherford's Voices of Freedom text. So I think, right, thinking beyond our traditional book club pairings and say I could pair a picture book, a poetry book with a graphic novel. The Hidden Figures in Women in Science pairing I did with my undergraduate students at Hunter College, and they were super excited to see that they could learn about these topics in different ways. So these are just some ways, right? So we can think about pairing through text through topics, themes, poetry. And my question to you out there, Twitterverse, if you're watching and you're on Twitter, our first question to you would be, what are some of your favorite texts? So share some texts with us and ways to organize them. So if there are different ways that you organize them by different topics, or some favorite text that you want, Twitter to see, please put that out on Twitter, hashtag the Ed Collab Gathering, #1. And let's continue. Luz is going to tell us a little more about our next topic.
Yes, thank you. So if you joined us for our talk last time, we spoke all about translanguaging. And so, we want to point out how translanguaging exists in literature as well. And of course, this is to be expected because translanguaging is simply how bilinguals use language. And translanguaging comes from the work of Ofelia Garcia. We're both Carla and I are so fortunate to be able to have her as a mentor, and we've learned so much from her over the years. But just really quickly, translanguaging is both a philosophy and a pedagogy, and both of these go hand in hand. Obviously, you cannot have one without the other, right? But Garcia explains that we have one language repertoire that contains features from different named languages like Spanish, English, Haitian Creole, and so on. And we continuously draw from that repertoire when navigating and making sense of our surroundings, of our contexts. And so bilinguals use language fluidly, and this is normally what we do. And using translanguaging as a pedagogy and as a classroom practice serves to really legitimize this practice, this everyday practice for bilingual people. And translanguaging as pedagogy also helps us leverage that in the classroom. So for teaching, for learning, for having authentic conversations with peers, etc. So it's really about centering students' authentic ways of being, language practices, their language practices, which are obviously a fundamental component of the way people are. And the way that texts or translanguaging is revealed in text is, there's so many different examples that we'll show you today. But this guide right here that we have on this slide is a CUNY NICEP guide to translanguaging in Latina literature or Latinx literature. And this guide really does an amazing job of describing the different genres in Latinx literature and how they use translanguaging. So we highly recommend that. And we can probably tweet out the link right to this.
Yeah, I'm tweeting it out right now, Lou.
Thanks, Carla. So they provide specific examples of books and how it's used. Characters in literature, obviously bilingual, and it would be inauthentic to write someone's narration or dialogue monolingually. So translanguaging is very present. Junot Díaz, for instance, you can see a lot of this in his writing. And actually, we can go to the next slide really quickly, and then we'll go back to the third question. I really love this quote that I actually found in the Translanguaging Guide here. And he says, "For me, allowing Spanish to exist in my text without the benefit of italics or quotation marks marks a very important political move. Spanish is not a minority language or minoritized language. Not in this hemisphere, not in the US, not in the world, inside my head. So why treat it like one? Why other it? Why denormalize it? By keeping Spanish as normative in a predominantly English text, I wanted to remind readers of the mutability of languages and to mark how steadily English is transforming Spanish and Spanish is transforming English. So again, Junot Diaz reminds us that language is fluid, forever changing and evolving. So we have to use that as an asset in our teaching. And the way that we can use it in book clubs, if we can go back to the previous slide, the way that we can use it in book clubs is simply by making those spaces in our classrooms for authentic conversations to take place. So when students feel free to draw from all of their available language resources or repertoire to talk about the characters, the theme, etc., or they can write journal reflections, again, drawing from their entire language repertoire. Maybe they can use sticky notes to place in different parts of the important points of the book, and they can write a note to themselves, again, feeling free to draw from their entire language resources. And these are just a few examples. But if you'd also like to share how you might want to use Translanguaging in the classroom with book clubs, you can also feel free to share with that with us on Twitter.
Yes. Can I show an example? Sure. Yes. So yesterday, with the teachers, when we were looking at the Poet-X, and we were looking at the use of translanguaging in some of the poems. And so what was interesting is that we were looking at it as readers, but then when we got to write our own poetry, what was beautiful is that as we were practicing, we noticed that we were using our, like you said, our authentic selves and our authentic language practices. And I felt so heard and so seen and so affirmed by seeing the way that I language, or that I am, the way I exist in this world, see it on the page. And so for us, it was just like a really affirming experience. So then we went to go write our own poems.
Yes. So there's also a book by Ofelia Garcia and Susana Ibarra Johnson and Kate Seltzer. It's called The Translanguaging Classroom. Mm-hmm. And it's a couple of slides from this one. Let's see. Thank you. Okay. Do you want to talk about that, Carla?
Yeah. So in the Translanguaging Classroom, which is one of the really key texts that we've been using at Hunter College with our pre-service and in-service teachers, I've loved bringing in some readings from there for our bilingual literacy course. So for any of you who are if you are a monolingual teacher in this general education classroom, if you are a bilingual, multilingual teacher in bilingual settings, whether it's transitional, dual language, bilingual, different kinds of models, I recommend this book to all of you. And really, it deserves a teacher study group around it because it has really great classroom examples, as well as tools that you can use to really get to know your students' authentic language practices. And so I just put here some examples in terms of what this might look like, in terms of, Luz has talked about translanguaging as a philosophy. So philosophy for affirming students' authentic beings, and really for social justice as we affirm the whole language repertoire of students' practices. And it's also pedagogy, right? So it's also a method, it's a way of teaching. And this is what it might look like. So it might look like a teacher who is monolingual or using only features of, let's say, English, in teaching a reading strategy for their students in a book club unit. And then the students, when they engage and they try this out, they use their full linguistic repertoire, right? Meaning, in let's say in the case in my classroom, if I were mostly using features of English in teaching a strategy, and then when I had the students practice with their book clubs, I had some who were writing in Spanish, using mostly features of Spanish, or writing using features of Spanish and English, right? And so it looks different ways, and it might be in the way they take their notes. It might be in the way that they discuss their books. It might even be in the way that they are reading. So if they're reading books that they might have two copies of, like Jackie Delgado, Quiere Darte una Paliza, right? They have the Spanish copy, and then they have a copy in English. That too, the way they are using the text, the way they're reading, the way they take notes, the way they're engaging in discussions.
Yeah, and I think it's really important that you mentioned that, anybody can do this, whether or not you're bilingual, right? And that's a question that we get all the time, especially, and also in my classes, in teacher education, this is a question that comes up often, but you can absolutely make spaces for this to happen in your classroom, regardless of the programmatic structure you teach in, or regardless of the languages that you speak.
All right, so for the next one, this is another example of translanguaging, and here it's an interactive read aloud to set up. So a lot of teachers have loved setting up book club discussions, saying, I'm going to start my book club unit or book club conversations where there's a whole class conversation around a text, or there's a text that everyone knows, and I'm going to put the students in groups for them to discuss that text. So one of the texts that I've been using a lot lately, and it's Dante Katz's Mama's Nightingale. And here, as you see in this slide, I set up the introduction as a way to make the students aware that I, as their teacher, am aware of the questions that they have, the concerns that they have about what they've been hearing about immigration and what they've been hearing or feeling about their own families. So a lot of the students I visit in schools express their fear around families being separated due to policies with immigration. So in this read aloud, the way I had planned it was I will set it up as a way that I can help the students process these topics and also notice how the characters in this text process the topics, so we can have that conversation. But definitely it's a way that we can consider using texts that, again, show the students that we are listening to them. And that's key here. I don't want us to get wrapped up into the details of like planning the day-by-day book clubs until we first consider, what do I know about the students? What do I know about their position in this like socio-political context, right? What is happening around us that students will need our support engaging these topics, right? And that's why the topic, the title of this workshop is really important. Our teaching practices culturally and linguistically sustaining. And in this case, I was searching for a text that was that would be accessible for the 5th graders I was working with, and I'm thankful for Dante Katz's Mama's Nightingale that allowed me to launch those conversations with this text. So moving on to the actual tool. So what does it look like then? So we have text selected. We will be authentic with the students' language practices. Well, then how do we support their thinking about these texts and making sure we are doing it in such a way that's accessible and also challenging them and having them join us and come along in this journey to really delving deep into these topics. So here are 3 different tools that I've created for my middle schools that I work with and that I've been using. And so one is on helping students with their summarizing, the other is on themes, and the other is on author's craft. And I want to show you an example. So let's go to the example, zooming into the summarizing with Piecing Me Together, right? So Piecing Me Together by Renee Watson. Thank you, Renee Watson. Which someone please thank her, because she's like changed my life. And I can't wait to use this book this summer. So what if students were going to read Piecing Me Together and I wanted them to think about summarizing the text in terms of character, right? So I might talk about the main character, Jade, and how the challenges that she might be experiencing or her different roles, right? Jade as a daughter, right? Jade as an artist, Jade as a student, right? So maybe focusing on character. If we move on to the next slide with a focus on conflict, right? What might this look like if I teach students that they can take a text and summarize it in a way that looks at the different kinds of conflict, right? So in this slide, I have here that one of the conflicts has to do around race, right? And the experience that Jade has with dealing with racial conflict at her school, or dealing with that conflict in her friendships, specifically with her friend Sam, or in society, and how she uses poetry to address what's happening in society. If we go to the next example, what about if it's a focus on theme, right? And I like to remind my students, right, that we have several themes in these texts, right? And thinking about themes related to art and art as healing, or the impacts of poverty, or speaking up for yourself as a liberating act, or being an advocate for yourself and the courage that it takes, and doing this in community, like that epic culminating scene, which I'm not going to talk about because if you haven't read it, I'm not going to be one of those people that spoils books for you. So just you have to read this text, and I believe giving students these kind of tools will help them have these conversations, as well as really we can create these tools with the students, right? We can listen in, and we'll talk about other using tools like in with apps and our phones and devices, but to think about how can we have students create these tools, right? I can show them an example, but we also want to acknowledge that they can also create these tools themselves. If we go to the next slide, 15 on author's craft, I created this as thinking about teachers who were using the Teachers College Reading Writing units of study, and they were talking about teaching students author's craft. And I said, well, what if we decided to create a tool that had these epic images that they've engaged with in society or that we can introduce them to? So in terms of revealing actions, right? Like a lot of my students kept bringing up that action of 45 throwing paper towels to our community in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, and on how they felt about that, or the symbolism of people and players and those of us outside of the NFL who might not engage with the national anthem, or when we see pictures of the Puerto Rican flag in black and white, what does it symbolize? And so for me, it's been trying to create tools with students and saying, like, what are some images that you've seen? What are some memes that you've been using that might help you remember that we're going to look for this kind of craft and stories? And then finally, the final tool I'll share, because then Luz has other tools that she's been using with her student, is on developing themes, right? And so a lot of the teachers I work with are saying, oh, we're using progressions from the units of study for Teachers College Reading Writing Project, or we've created our own as we listen to students and look at where we'd like to take them by the end of middle school. And so I keep saying, if that's great, if you have your tool, and with them, you might listen in to what are some of the ways that they talk about books, and create with them these kind of tools to have both the what, right? So the process, what is this going to look like? And also the how, like the what and the how on the same tool. So we give them this kind of support. And Luz is going to show you a little bit of what she's doing with her.
So before I continue, there's a question from Twitter. It says, what is your advice? Where's the advice for leading multilingual story times for pre-K and primary grades?
Oh, can we do that for next year too?
Yeah, right. Let's do that.
Let me hold on to that question, and then I'll let you continue. And I'm gonna, write that question down. Thinking about it. I've been doing work in K2 classrooms this year, so I can just say a little bit about what that's been looking like. Okay, go ahead.
Awesome. All right. So I'm always looking ways to integrate technology into my classroom, and one of the ways that I've done it is through the use of Flipgrid. And actually, Carla introduced me to this because she's amazing and she knows all kinds of amazing tools to use.
That's also because Hunter College colleagues have been using it too. So shout out.
Okay. Yeah, so students can use Flipgrid on a mobile device, tablet, or computer as long as it has a camera. And you can set up a class grid and post activities in that grid for your students to participate in. So for instance, we were reading Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe in my class in book clubs, and I created short prompts for my students to address the first half of the book. And the reason why actually we're using YA novel in my classroom, these students are future teachers of preteens or young adults, and I wanted them to be able to remember what it's like to empathize, and when you're trying to navigate everyday life while trying to figure out who you are. And it's a multi-layered process, and it's complicated. So it was really important for me to integrate YA literature in my teacher education classrooms. But going back to Flipgrid, it allows you to share your thoughts in very short amount of, in short videos. For this one is 90 seconds. So for this one question, the students had to speak on the connections and parallels between the students and the main characters. And they had to do so in 90 seconds. And then they can post the video to the class grid, and other students can also reply to those videos with their videos or with videos of their own. And so it's been actually a lot of fun, and it gives students just another way, another platform to sort of share their thoughts on the characters and connections they see with their teaching, because they are in classrooms to a degree with a master's teacher. So they're seeing the parallels already. So it's been a wonderful tool for that. Another way to discuss text is by doing a picture mapping activity. And this is from Fresh Takes on Teaching Literary Elements by Smith and Willem. And you can see the steps here. They're sort of rereading key details and introductions, conclusions, or quoted materials, right? And thinking about some of the surprise shifts and changes and directions, etc. And consider ways to represent that in a symbol or icon or a picture, and to really avoid using words. And whenever I create a space for my students to do something other than writing, maybe through a video, maybe through poetry, maybe through a drawing, they always blow me away. They're so creative, and it's just amazing how what my students can do. So in the next slide, you'll see one of the posters that one of my students drew with his group, and he's an amazing artist. As you can see, his name is Kong. And, shout out to Kong for giving me permission to use this, actually. So you can see for this specific activity, we talked about one section of the book in Aristotle and Dante, and the group decided what was going to go on the poster and then talked about it with the rest of the class. And you can see what came out of it, and he's an amazing artist. So it's just an important way to just, or let me just back up. It's important to allow students to express whatever it is that they're reading, processing through various multimodal ways, through video or through pictures, maybe through acting it out. And this is just a couple of examples to do that.
Thank you, Luz. So with the time we have left, we're going to quickly try an activity out together. As I'm looking at our time, because I'd love to go on for all day with this. So we thought, why don't we read in community, right? And the picture on the top shows you teachers who are, they're pre-service. Some of them are pre-service, some of them are already teaching, and we all engaged in different book clubs. So we were reading books by Duncan Donatiu, Meg Medina. They were reading Ari and Dante across 4 months, so they rotated books each month. And for the picture books, they had several in a packet. And then they responded to them and did a nice gallery walk where they were walking across the classroom. And that's what you see here. And then in the picture below, you see a presentation that one of my students, Amiya Soto Carrion, she is a second-year teacher here in Harlem in a bilingual, dual language first grade classroom. And she wanted to make sure that all the other teachers, she's second year and she's in a course with first year teachers who are also teaching students in New York City in bilingual programs. And she said, let's make sure we all know our, Latinx authors. And so she did this Kahoot. So those of you who've used Kahoot, you know how excited students get with Kahoot, whether they're, middle school or whether they're adults, because this, class was pretty hype with this presentation. So thankfully, we had a great time and we got to know text. So why don't we try an activity out together? So here are the 3 steps. We're going to read the excerpt in community. We're going to process it, just talking it through in the little few minutes we have left. And then if you're, if you're on Twitter with us, tweet your responses. So we'll somehow get this engagement going. So our first text, Luz is going to read us. It's from Piecing Me Together. It's the first page, so no spoilers, for those of you who haven't, finished the text. So here we go. First text we're going to read. Go.
Okay. And yeah, if we can have the next slide. Thank you. And so Piecing Me Together by Renee Watson. Tener éxito, to succeed. When I learned the Spanish word for succeed, I thought, let me start over. When I learned the Spanish word for succeed, I thought it was kind of ironic that the word exit is embedded in it. Like the universe was telling me that in order for me to make something of this life, I'd have to leave home, my neighborhood, my friends. So when I read this, I sort of thought about my own life, and did this happen in my own life? Did I have to leave to have, to succeed? And well, I guess I did. I grew up in LA, and I moved to New York when I was just fresh out of college when I was 21. And I just recently came back to California last year when I accepted a tenure track position at the California State University. So in a way, this does describe my journey. I didn't make it quite to my neighborhood yet. I'm not in LA. I'm in the Central Valley, but I'm a little bit closer to home. But home means many different things for me now. Home is LA. Home is Mexico, where I'm originally from, in Central West Coast. Home is also New York. I was there for 12 years. So home means different things for me now as well. So, you know, there's a lot of feelings that come with this, definitely.
When I first read this, I was like, Renee Watson is going to do to me what like Beyonce does to me with these performances, which is like, I just want to fall and cry. I can't handle it. This hit me so hard when I first read this book. I was like, I can't even get emotional right now because this is, oh my goodness. But when I first read this, and of course the next line, for those of you who keep reading or you've read this book, you know, it talks about her school, right? And having to leave, she leaves her neighborhood to go to this school that she goes to. And for me, it's also like Lou's thinking about redefining home and redefining my role and always questioning is how am I redefining home and how do I feel in these different spaces, right? Am I being welcomed? Am I being loved? And sometimes you create, like what people call your chosen family in different spaces, right? And being really revolutionary about that. And so I just want to pause right there because of our time and also to go back to, did you notice what we just did? I've been in classrooms where students immediately have this kind of personal reaction and they want to talk about it. And I've unfortunately heard them being shut down and say, I want you to stick to the text, stick to the text, right? And I want you to talk about the character or use these tools. And so just with this little example, just to show it's like we have to make room for our teaching to be culturally and linguistically sustaining, for students to experience these texts and give them time to read a little bit more and develop their character theories and ideas about themes of the text, knowing that, yeah, after we have this conversation, we can go back in circle and go back to the text and say, well, what does our experience, right? Or how does our experience inform the way we read this text, right? Our positionality is informing the way I encounter this text. And the fact that I see the word tener éxito, I was like, ooh, there's a little Spanish in here. And I want to know, like, where is this going, right? And this topic or this theme about home and success, and do we need to leave one to get the other? So just keeping that in mind. And then moving to the next one, if we wanted to pair text, right, and have these conversations across text that have to do with these topics, right, and say we could do that with poetry. Like we can talk a little bit about how that previous excerpt also helps us think through this topic with this poem. And we'll end with this, you know, with this poem by Gina Valdez in Cool Salsa. Soy de aquí y soy de allá, from here and from there. Continue, Lucy, you can continue.
Yes. From here and from there, born in LA, del otro lado, de este, crecí en LA y en Ensenada. My mouth still tastes of naranjas con chile. Soy del sur y del norte, crecí zurda y norteada, cruzando fronteras crossing San Andreas, tartamuda y mareada. Where are you from? Soy de aquí y soy de allá. I didn't build this border. This halts me. The word frontera splits on my tongue.
Yes, snaps for some poetry.
Yes, what is it? We need to stop here.
So with the 2 minutes that we have left, we just want to end thanking you for joining us. And we can't wait to go to Twitter and see your own reactions to the poem and see how maybe the poem helped you do a little bit more. Like that poem hits me because it's not only just the way it's written and because we have el español ahí mezclado con el inglés, right? Or see it as like not separate, but it's one way that Gina Valdez is like expressing herself. It's her language repertoire. And I feel like I feel seen. But I want to end with that quote by Paulo Freire, right, in the next slide, that educators need to know what happens in the world of children with whom they work. They need to know the universe of their dreams, the language with which they skillfully defend themselves from the aggressiveness of their world, what they know independently of the school, and how they know it. From this book, that also changed my life when I was in a whole other career path, and having a course on liberating pedagogies and reading Freira's work and critical pedagogy really got me on this track to teaching. So just want to thank you that we're really looking forward to keep engaging on this topic on Twitter.
Yes, and Chris and Patrick, we're going to answer your question on Twitter since we're out of time today. But thank you so much for joining us, everybody. Thank you. Until next time.
Oh, I hear Diana. Oh, we can hear you. There you are.
There you are. It was this so resonated with me and my parents' journey. It's amazing work. So thank you for sharing.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. I am going to introduce the next section, if I can screen share for a second here. What we have coming up. So those of you that are finishing up with this amazing workshop, number 1, we have session 2 coming up. And so we have workshop number 4, which is Kate Roberts, and she'll be discussing transferring learning from one learning experience to the next. We also will have session 5, Trisha Bavaria and Kim Parker, Teach This, Not That, Disrupting Texts in the Secondary Classroom. And session 6, which is with Deborah Linham, Dyslexia, what every educator needs to know. So join in, take a few minutes, collect your thoughts, get in the Twitterverse, and we'll see you at noon.